My name is Lynn Bryan. It was great to meet everybody this morning at those who are there in person, and really nice to meet everybody who's joined us this afternoon who wasn't able to come this morning. I am the director for the Center for Advancing the Teaching and Learning of STEM, otherwise known as Catalyst. I'm a faculty fellow for K-12 STEM engagement, working with Steve and Rod. And I'm also a professor of science education with a joint appointment in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction and the Department of Physics and Astronomy. And just a quick overview today, I'm going to give you a little bit of background of myself and my sort of pathway to where I am today, but also some context for the work that I do. Then I will provide, time permitting, 3 different examples of how teaching and learning is a focus of the engagement work that I do, and how we conceptualize societal impact in those 3 different examples. And then some considerations for those of you who may be thinking about engagement through teaching and learning, and maybe are new to thinking about societal impact through teaching and learning. And so just very quickly, I won't go through this whole thing, but Rod just said, how do you get from A to B? Well, this was my path, a little bit circuitous, but there's just a couple of little lessons in here. I think probably most of us have a path some way, in some sense like that. You know, I was just a kid who did well in science and math, kind of liked it, didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, so I thought I'd be an engineer. Mind you, this was in the 80s. So at that time, there were only 20% females at Georgia Tech. So to answer Mitch Daniels' question, where are the males? They were at Georgia Tech at that time. But anyway, so I took this circuitous route, got into teaching after being a chemist at Eli Lilly. Then I decided to get my PhD at Purdue, ended up as a professor at University of Georgia. And finally, 15 years ago, I came here to Purdue University as a professor. And it probably was in this square here that I really can identify where I started thinking about the notion of impact of my work. And at the time that I started as a PhD student, we didn't even phrase it as engagement. So the tripartite mission of a university was research, teaching, and service. And so even the conception of what we do now has changed over time. And I really feel like engagement is captures much better the type of work that all of us do here in this session, and particularly the work that I do, I would characterize as much more engagement than service. And also thinking about the societal impact of the work we do, as well as the reciprocal impact that the work that we do has on not only our partners, but on us. So once I came to Purdue as a professor, I think probably the point at which I got in touch with Steve and really focused my work on my teaching and learning and work on engagement, and really started thinking about the societal impact, was when I became the director of Catalyst. And just a really quick brief history of Catalyst. It's the Center for Teaching and Learning of STEM. We have a number of people who work in the center. It's a college level center, but we are represented by 5 colleges. All of the professors who are research professors in Catalyst have joint appointments. And so all of us have a joint appointment in the College of Education, and then another college on campus. And the way that we came about was actually sort of some serendipity. The dean called me into her office one day, and we were charged in the college to come up with, for those of you that were around probably about 10 years ago, you might have remembered there were several cluster hires on campus. And the College of Ed was charged with coming up with a cluster hire in STEM education. So she called me into the office, asked me to think about what that cluster hire theme should be. And at the same time, there was a center that was really going to close. It was failing, and we had to decide, are we going to, sort of reinvent this center, or are we just going to let it dissolve, because it had some state funding, so it wasn't an easy decision. So these two things together sort of led to the development of Catalyst. And I can always talk with somebody. I know that one of the fellows is interested in starting a center, but it's just been pretty much my academic life for the last 10 years. This year will be our 10th year. And it really has been able to expand sort of the engagement part of the work that I do just by being involved in this center. And just as a reminder, Rod shared today, not too long ago, the difference between scholarly impact and societal impact. And so in the examples that I will talk about in a few minutes, we're talking about the change or benefit beyond academia to the economy, society, culture, public policy, services, health, and the environment or quality of life. So I'm going to start with 3 examples, and hopefully have some time at the end. I don't want to go through these so quickly that, if anybody has a question, please feel free to put your hand up and I don't mind to answer it. But these 3 examples I just picked out of the work that I've been doing. I've been a professor. This is my 25th year. And so there have been a lot of projects that, even though long ago I might not have conceptualized them as engagement or scholarship of engagement, as I moved into this space more intentionally, these projects have, I've reconsidered how these projects really have an impact. And so the first level is just an example of one of the projects that I've been involved with for 10 years that really we consider our motivation was national level impact. And it originated with a reform in science education. So about 2011, 2012, the field of science education was looking at the current set of teaching and learning standards for science in K-12 classrooms. And it was just time to sort of raise the bar and rethink the standards. And one of the most significant differences in this new set of standards in a framework for teaching and learning science was the integration of engineering and technology into the structure of science education. Well, this is just a tremendous undertaking, if you can imagine. Teachers are usually they take courses in the discipline that they're going to teach, but most teachers don't teach engineering if they're teaching science. I didn't even have any background in engineering when I started this. I was a chemist at Eli Lilly for a number of years, but there's some differences between, science inquiry and engineering design. So there was a lot of motivation on my part to look at how can we prepare teachers to meet these new standards. And the standards also took less of a focus on process skills in science and more of a focus on practices, because it's the practices of science, it's the practices of engineering that really are at the core of doing science or doing engineering. It really speaks to the nature of those disciplines. And so that was sort of motivation for one of my colleagues, Ala Samara Pungavan, and I to work in this space of how can we better prepare teachers to meet these standards. And not only that, but we were also interested, so it was sort of a combination of 2 things. We were interested in these science practices, but we were interested in them with young children. And so this slide here lists the practices. And so what we wanted to do was to develop a project where we're using some of these practices, especially underemphasized science practices. And one of the most underemphasized science practices in US classrooms is modeling. Most classrooms do not teach science through modeling-based approaches. And so while we were integrating many of these other practices, we focus the curriculum on intentionally integrating modeling in science instruction. But the other area that really combined with that is that the brand new standards were really, in our view, underestimating the capabilities of young children. There had been, over the past several years, lots of research coming out in developmental sciences and cognitive sciences that showed that young children really can think abstractly and have some of the antecedent experiences to be able to think about things and represent and reason through abstract causal principles and mechanisms. So with those two things, we developed this research project that was called Modeling in Primary Grades. And while it's a research agenda, we had other motivations for this as well. So one of those was working with teachers and teaching teachers, because that's a way to multiply your impact. If you teach a teacher, the teacher is going to have hundreds, if not thousands of students over his or her career. But also by contributing to the research in our field, we're hoping to press the field forward in thinking about working with young children and not underestimating the types of capabilities that children have. So the core of this project was, one, developing a curriculum. And so this slide shows a unit that has 3 lessons, and it takes about a month to 6 weeks to go through this unit. It also involved the teacher teaching this unit in the classroom. And so there were characteristics of these lessons that were really core to the project. And then there was also a research agenda that was an overlay on top of that. Of course, we were really deeply interested in how children make sense of models, how they interpret models, and how, if they learn models about the particle nature of matter, can they apply those to explain phase changes. And so far in the past 10 years, we've been working with 2nd grade classrooms and kindergarten classrooms, and we're about to go back to NSF for additional funding. So far we've had about $3 million, and we're hoping to get some money for a future study where we can look at a trajectory of learning based on what we've found out from kindergarten and 2nd grade classrooms, that we can look at a trajectory of learning and scaffolded learning across kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. And for anybody who remembers any of the science, or if you're in science, states of matter, the particle nature of matter, is one of the most core ideas that transcends all of the sciences. And we often don't start that instruction, serious instruction, until 4th or 5th grade. And there's plenty of research to show that even, college students still don't understand the particle nature of matter. So there's really, in terms of what we know in later grades, no reason why we can't at least try this out in younger grades. And so that was, that's why NSF funded us. It was all exploratory, and they said, hey, let's see what happens. And anyway, it's a great project. I love working in these classrooms. We have lots of different ways that we're looking at the data across different studies. And, we found out really some things that we feel like our impact is in the field of science education and cognitive science. So still sort of in that academic area, but it influences the policies and the curricula and the standards that are discussed in science education, and hopefully how they'll be revised in the future. But also, we have an impact on teachers in schools, the professional development of teachers. The teachers are developing deeper knowledge of science. They're developing practices that are transferable to other science topics, modeling, modeling-based approaches to inquiry, integrating formative assessment methods, learning how to have, really discourse-rich, scaffolded discussions with young children. And then, of course, just the number of students that we've been able to reach across this project, just having a more robust foundation in science, and hopefully an interest and motivation in science for later years, because they have such great experiences. I'll never forget the first year that we were in a kindergarten classroom, and we'd been there for about 3 weeks. And I walk in one day, and this young boy just explodes with excitement and says, the Purdue show is here. You know, they just always looked forward to science, in large part because it's really hard to spend time on science in elementary classrooms. And so it really is something that's very engaging for them. At the state level, we're driven by helping the state meet their goals for K-12 STEM education. And the state of Indiana actually has a STEM strategic plan. This strategic plan has 3 objectives for 100% of all K-12 schools and teachers. And whether they'll meet it by 2025, we don't know. But part of the work that Catalyst does is to provide programming and to conduct studies and to reach out to teachers to help the state and schools and teachers meet these the strategic plan objectives by 2025. So here are just some of the programs that we have developed, you know, in the last 10 years. We have undergraduate degree concentrations in integrated STEM. And integrated STEM, when somebody says integrated STEM, what we're referring to is the integration of engineering and technology design and the teaching of math and science in K-12 classrooms. Now, over the last maybe, you know, 5 or 6 years, we're starting to see some specific integrated STEM classrooms, some STEM experiences and engineering classes in schools. So that's really encouraging. But we have certificates that graduate students, that teachers can do online, graduate students can do face-to-face, undergraduate students who are becoming teachers can build that expertise. And again, have a multiplying effect. The more that we're able to train teachers, the more that they're able to go out into the schools and teach kids and have, you know, a broader impact. We have a new online interdisciplinary master's degree with licensure. We have scholarships. We run the Indiana STEM Education Conference every year. One of the great things that came out of COVID was we usually had a face-to-face STEM Kids Conference, and we were limited in the number of kids that we could service. So we could service around 200 kids in a face-to-face conference. We're able to reach 900 kids by doing the conference virtually. And we have our graduate students involved, so they're learning how to you know, translate their content knowledge down to, you know, like a 5th or 6th grade level that, you know, is meaningful for kids. It's just, you know, been a great experience. But very quickly, the program that I'd like to highlight, because it's a very important partnership, is our Indianapolis STEM Teacher Residency program. It's a post-baccalaureate, so that means they have a bachelor's degree but want to become a teacher. So it's a teacher residency program where they train in Indianapolis Public Schools. And Indianapolis Public Schools, we've been working together now for 2 years. You know, a little bit of a steep curve and learning how to work together, but now we have this great relationship, really, truly a partnership between IPS, the College of Ed, and Catalyst, and we're trying to support those who are in a career in STEM who want to transition into becoming a STEM teacher in science or mathematics in middle or high school. And one of the needs that we're really meeting is that Indianapolis Public Schools really has a hard time retaining their teachers. About 33% of their science and math teachers stay in the district. And just some statistics in 2018-19, they had 169 teachers on emergency permits. That means 169 people were teaching math, especially math and science and other, you know, disciplines in their schools that had no training in teaching whatsoever, and may not even have had a robust background in that discipline. And they have vacancy ratio of 2.8, let's see, candidate to vacancy ratio for mathematics is 2.08 per position and 1.47 for science. So there's a huge need to have teachers, but not just teachers, high quality teachers in their middle and high schools. And so We have, in terms of impact for them, our teachers stay in their classrooms for 3 years after the program because they have a commitment. And our hope is that they'll stay, their whole career in teaching in IPS. But the IPS classrooms are typically under-resourced. We're able to provide them materials and classroom resources, mentor teachers, get professional development. And of course, one of their goals is to improve their passing scores in math and other assessments in science and so forth at the state level. This is an example where we are conducting research, but that is not the majority of the data that we collect right now. This is a $5 million US Department of Education project. And so we have a program evaluation conducted every year through the Evaluation and Learning Research Center. So they do our program evaluation, which collects a lot of the data for the measures of impact. And therefore we have this very complex logic model that helps us organize and align the goals, the activities, the methods, the outcomes, and how we're going to measure those outcomes and impact. Let's see, how am I doing on time? I think I'm a little over here. This one's really short. Just in terms of locally, we have a great partnership with St. Lawrence Elementary School. We run STEM kids clubs and science kids clubs at St. Lawrence Elementary School. We are able to impact students, teachers, parents, and even Purdue. When we have these clubs, I run a service learning course for students who are going to run these science clubs where they learn about how children learn or how people learn science. They learn about how to design inquiry-based, engaging, and just pedagogically sound science instruction. And then they have a chance to go out and do it with kids in sort of a low pressure environment. And this was one place where I underestimated the interest of our partner. So the first time that we did this, I had 4 students and we planned on about 20 kids registering for the science club. And the Friday before we were supposed to start on the next Friday, I went and got all the registration papers, and she handed me this big pile. There were 90 kids who signed up for our STEM or our science club. And so, it really speaks to the need that there was and the interest that there was in doing something like this after school. And so I'll just wrap up really quickly. If you have any questions about sort of getting started in this space with teaching and learning, especially those who may be doing a project that has broader impacts for an NSF grant and you need somebody to work with, consider working with somebody who has expertise in teaching and learning within your discipline. You don't want to alienate the audience that you're trying to reach by, not having great pedagogically sound instruction that you're delivering. Involve us in the design process early, but it does often require funding. So that's one thing in terms of writing a grant. If you have this teaching and learning part, to really think about having some compensation for sometimes the teachers, materials, your colleagues' time, things like that. Be aware of policies for program involving minors. We have a website at Purdue. Human subjects approval. You need the approval from superintendent's offices and principals and teachers. And usually it starts at that level and goes down. You can't just go into a school and say, hey, would you like to partner with me? There are protocols in school districts. And so, I'd be happy to advise on just from my experiences on that. And then school systems may also have their own mandatory training in terms of, keeping minors safe. And then consider multiplying strategies when you're working in the space of engagement through teaching and learning, training trainers. So, training teachers means that they can go out and teach kids. Well, if I train teachers to train teachers in the whole district, then those teachers that I trained go and train more teachers, and that means even more kids. So think about these multiplying strategies. Also, centers, our education centers like Catalyst, are really great ways to multiply our impact. And then also just want to mention that measuring impact in teaching and learning engagement, that research in teaching and learning is not the same as program evaluation. And back in the day when we had service as instead of engagement, we had service as this space. I just remember one of the administrators telling a whole group of people that, people in the College of Education, their research is program evaluation. They can do that for you. And I just thought that's just not exactly what we do. We do rigorous empirical research in the College of Education. And there may be times when your vision of societal impact is at odds in some way with your partner's vision of societal impact. And an example of that, we had a conversation earlier in our little group. I am not interested in standardized test scores improving. I have, philosophically and theoretically issues with, the whole standardized testing movement, but it means a lot to my school district or my school or the teacher that I'm working with. Their pay is dependent on it. Funding from the state government, funding from the federal government is dependent on these scores. So while I may not find them meaningful or valuable, if my partner does, then of course I make that part of the work that we do, and I honor that because we have the capacity to try to address those things. So I will stop there.